and welcome to Perspective. India's nefarious designs have yet again been exposed when a Pakistani fisherman was apprehended by Indian intelligence to procure military uniforms. Of course, this is part of a disinformation campaign, as said by the Ministry of Interior. We'll be talking about this development and, of course, what it exposes in the larger light of Indian interference in Pakistan. Later on, of course, we talk about the uneasy calm on the Western Front as Islamabad talks with Kabul move forward, but of course, as Pakistan says, there will be conditional tied to verifiable action against the TTP and BLA. We'll be talking about that. And finally, minerals and geopolitics. A high-level US delegation is in Islamabad seeking cooperation in Pakistan's, mineral sector. We'll be talking about Washington's push here to diversify away from China's dominance. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Khurram Dastagir, who's a former defense minister. Thank you for being with us. A little later on, we'll also be joined by other guests during the course of the program. Khurram sahab, we've spoken about Indian interference time and again. Of course, Pakistan has been telling the world our story. This latest development, of course, is a case in point. How do you look at it?
Of the massive Indian espionage in Pakistan. We have seen just a little corner of it in the shape of Ijaz Mullah, of what kind of the scale and the granularity of what India is currently trying to achieve in Pakistan, which is to disrupt our very difficult and I would say very hard-found stability, both economic and political. And I would also remind your audience of the fact that it was as long as 9 years ago that our security forces apprehended the Indian spy, Yadav, who was found in Balochistan and had been operating through Iran. And the important part is, just to illustrate that this is not new, that he was found to be a serving naval officer in Indian Navy. And we've also had confessions from Indian government sources that they have ran an assassination campaign inside Pakistan. And having assassinated more than two dozen Pakistanis. So it's the scale of their effort to keep destabilizing India. And one final fact.
I want to interject here in terms of what was said by Khwaja Asif, defense minister also. The fact that Pakistan it is a ploy to keep Pakistan occupied both on the eastern and western borders. We see that happening, and of course, we'll move on to Afghanistan later. But in terms of the disinformation, do you think it's also targeting the loss of face that they've suffered post-Pahalgam in the international arena?
Yes, I think logic would dictate that they would have intensified their efforts of espionage inside Pakistan and to destabilize Pakistan. But the disinformation campaigns that they have run, again, I'll remind your audience that there was, I think, more than 4 years ago, that the Disinfo lab operating out of the European Union was found to be creating distrust of Pakistan internationally. And also the fact that as long ago as nearly a century, quarter century at the end of the previous century, in 2002-03, the current National Security Advisor of India was supposedly serving in the Indian Embassy in Islamabad as a commercial officer. So there's a long history. What has happened is that occasionally India has tried to attack us frontally also. Most recently, 2025, also before that in 2019. And it has always failed when it has attacked frontally. And this is also a fact to consider. So therefore, having been unable and frustrated in trying to defeat Pakistan overtly, India has now for a long time ran a very intensive covert campaign inside Pakistan. So it's like, Yadav, it was the assassination campaigns, and of course, Fitnatul Hindustan and Fitnatul Khawarij, both in KP and Balochistan, who are now being funded by India to keep Pakistan engaged on both borders. And our forces have, and the people of Pakistan who are standing behind our forces, have demonstrated that we are capable of being engaged on both borders, on the eastern and the western borders, and still, by grace of Allah, coming out strong.
Khurram sir, when we talk about, the trajectory and the timeline, and I think you've mentioned it very aptly when you say that, of course, Kulbhushan Yadav was a case in point. Today, Ijaz Mallah is a case in point. So, things, whatever's happening has been happening for a long time, decades now. In terms of the reaction from the international community, in terms of the dossiers that have been, presented to the world, are you going to, in your opinion, see a reaction at all of these proofs that the world continues to see of these nefarious designs coming from a neighbor continuously?
I'm not very optimistic because Pakistan has, for various reasons, been unable to elicit the same kind of sympathy and regard from the international community. It's not just these Indian espionage campaigns inside Pakistan, but the fact that Pakistan has made probably the greatest sacrifice in modern history in number of troops that have been martyred, officials martyred, civilians, men, women, children martyred, up to the tune of 80,000 Pakistanis. And so it's a question of how international geopolitics is looking at any given moment, but also the fact that the challenge is, of course, before the state of Pakistan, before Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, is how to run a multi-platform campaign telling the world the sacrifices Pakistan has made and how Pakistan is under daily attack from India, not overtly but covertly.
Khurram sir, I keep going back to the Prime Minister's address in UNGA because it really is the crux of our policy in the sense that, we want to be, and he said this, we want to have neighborly relations. We want to have a peaceful neighbor in the form of India. But what do you do when you share your borders with a country that continues to infiltrate you overtly, like you said, and through your backyard when you look at what's happening in Afghanistan? In that sense, there have to be, I know that, you said you're not optimistic, but international safeguards, international watch guards, the world reacting to this. How do we do that, and where do we go when we present dossiers, when we present it at the UNGA, when, we talk about it at the UNGA, we go to the Security Council, where does the buck stop for Pakistan?
The buck stops for Pakistan in using international law, not for a short duration, for one campaign, but it has to be a persistent effort to tell the world on all platforms. And by all platforms, I just don't mean Facebook. I mean, whether you are in the UN, whether you are at the UN Human Rights Council, whether you are on other international fora, and of course on social media, is to help the world visually see the effect that India is having on Pakistan and its continuous effort to keep Pakistan destabilized. One of the things I think India is most frustrated about is that they thought that they could just push Pakistan down because of its economic fragility. And now that, alhamdulillah, through the efforts of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir, we are going to come out of that economic fragility also. So their frustration is going to rise, is already risen, I think, unprecedentedly because of the diplomatic relevance that we have achieved since Marka-e-Haq. And India, of course, has essentially distilled and precipitated Pakistan's relevance by attacking us overtly in May of this year and bringing about the changes that we have seen in Pakistan's relevance on the world stage.
Khurram Sahib, again, something that was said today by the defense minister, occupying, when we talk about eastern and western fronts both, the nexus between Taliban and India, they can't be ignored. But in terms of retaliation, even when we look at Pahalgam, we only retaliated. We kept saying that we want peace. But when it comes down to it, of course, Pakistan wants to ensure that its borders are safe. Do you think that this kind of continuity can lead to a lot more than what India has bargained for?
It's something that I will sort of be very careful in saying what Pakistan is going to do. But internationally, the ability of a country is calculated by the arms that it has, and of course, the unity of the nation. And we have been blessed by the fact that in May 25, when the chips were down, the nation, the Pakistani nation, rose as one against the enemy and in favor of its state. So we have strength that we had ourselves underestimated. I would so go to that extent. But now that that strength has been demonstrated, we are capable of dealing with this menace. But we need to continue having the capability to deal with it. Doesn't mean that we do not tell the world what India has been doing. And I think to reinforce, we have seen recently more cases being filed against Indian citizens in North America. So we should reinforce that by reminding the world of the assassination campaign India has run inside Pakistan, and the fact that it continues to fund the terrorists that are attacking Pakistan, and the nexus between Afghanistan and India that you talked about. Many people used to sort of question it until a few months ago. But now that having this, Pakistan having made a major effort, first bilaterally, then trilaterally through China, and then multilaterally in the Moscow process, and the result coming out as the Afghan foreign minister flying directly from Moscow to New Delhi, I think finally has opened eyes and minds that this nexus that Pakistan used to allege is actually real and exists, and is now open to the world to see that how the Indians are acting through Afghanistan on our western border, and martyring our very valued officials, jawans, and the civilians.
Khurram Sahib, even domestically speaking, a lot of the times it is said, and of course, it's there's stark proof of the domestic reality of India at this time. When we look at the Bihar elections, when we look at the hyperbole, that it invariably inculcates, because that is what gets them the traction when we look at Modi as a prime minister. Do you think the dangerousness of it, and that is being pointed out by their own opposition, and is permeating in their own intelligentsia? Because that seems to be that one thing that maybe will make them pause and look at where they're taking the region with an enemy like Pakistan. They've known and demonstrated that they can't handle.
One of the most ironic and profound statements I've heard recently. I don't know who said it, but they said that Indian politics has become militarized. The Indian military has become politicized. It is because of this Hindutva and its unnatural hatred towards Muslims, most minorities, and also Pakistan. What, as you have correctly pointed out, is hatred is irrational. Most international security considerations and calculations are based upon the assumption that the actors are rational, that they want to save themselves, they want to minimize their own casualties and to inflict maximum casualty on the enemy. But when you are blinded by hatred, as India currently is, and thinking not of the region's security and of the fact that these are two nuclear powers that are neighbors, which is unprecedented and unprecedentedly dangerous, Uh, the danger is precisely in this, that they can uh, take certain actions out of their irrational hatred and prejudice,
Khurram
which
Sahib,
can
you
plunge this whole region into incalculable horror.
You've mentioned irrational hatred, ego, and I want your quick opinion on this, because we've seen the reaction when we took it Washington and what happened. The repeated statements that had to be sort of drilled on the international arena by the U.S. president, that it was 7 planes. First, the stages of it. First, of course, there was evasion. There was rolling of eyes. There was denial that was followed by evasion, and then there seems to be this shying away from reality on the part of India, at what is clearly the power that Pakistan has demonstrated, because it seems to be a question of ego. When there's an enemy across the border that is so egotistical that they are willing to sort of, burn their own land, as it seems India is, there can't be a rational option, right? Like you said, for us also. Because we can't talk to them, they don't seem to hear us, reality doesn't seem to permeate.
And that is actually has been Pakistan's strength in the aftermath of Mahrukh Hameed. I was very fortunate to be a member of the Prime Minister's diplomatic mission to different world capitals during the summer, just after
Yeah.
Mahrukh Hameed. And what we found was universal praise and appreciation. The code word used was Pakistan's restraint. When in fact, what Pakistan was being praised for, the fact that when India irrationally threw missiles at us on May the 10th, which could have been nuclear. Who knew? Once the missile is in the
Yeah.
air, no
Yeah.
one has an idea of its true nature. Although, of course, one can check its signature, its speed, but still, it is a risk. And the fact that Pakistan did not respond in kind. This was what was appreciated worldwide. And one of the reasons that different powers in the world are looking at Pakistan differently was precisely this, that Pakistan didn't act irrationally and Pakistan showed restraint. And this is actually our strength going forward. But on so many fronts, this irrationality of India and the danger of being both countries being nuclear power needs to be exposed further. There's a new movie out, I think, which should focus minds. It's called A House of Dynamite, of
Yeah.
a fictional story of how when a missile has been launched on the United States and it finds itself incapable of dealing with it, and what kind of reaction and sorrow and the horror of it. I think it should focus minds across the world, but principally the fact that it is the India which is the real danger in the region.
Right. Thank you so much, Khurram Sahib. Thank you as always. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to go on to Saifullah Mahsud, who's an Afghan affairs expert. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Masood, we know that in terms of the mediation that is happening, of course, Pakistan has laid out our conditionalities very clearly. How is it being taken? How is it being received? What do you feel? What is your perception of what will follow?
I mean, at best, I can say that the Taliban are dilly-dallying at the moment, despite the intervention of Doha, of Qatar and Turkey, two brotherly countries, that has very good relationships with Pakistan and with Afghanistan. They have so far not acceded to Pakistan's legitimate demands vis-a-vis, control over the terrorist outfits that are operating inside Afghanistan, and the threat that they're posing to Pakistan, continued threat that they're posing to Pakistan since the last 4 years. Pakistan has pleaded with them time and again, asked them to honor their agreements, honor their commitments under the Doha Agreement and as a responsible member of the international community, and make sure that no threat emanates from Afghan soil to Pakistan. But so far, the Taliban have not done anything. In fact, if you look at the reports of the analytical support and monitoring committee of the UN Security Council, that makes it very clear that they're not just housing TTP and BLA, but and Al Qaeda, but besides that, 21 terrorist outfits are present in Afghanistan, and they are posing a threat not just to Pakistan but to other neighboring states and to the world at large. So those commitments that the Taliban has with the world, they have not honored them so far. At best, the talks that we have held with them so far in Doha and in Istanbul, that have yielded a ceasefire between the two countries, but nothing has been finalized so far. All the Istanbul agreement went a step further than the Doha one, and there was an agreement that was shared with the media, but that agreement only calls for a ceasefire and calls for a monitoring mechanism to monitor the ceasefire by both the sides, so that both the sides remain peaceful till the time when we meet again. Or it calls for the meeting of principles on November 6th again in Istanbul. So ceasefire is all we have gotten so far. I mean, it talks of penalties on the state that violates the ceasefire, but it doesn't say what penalty, and the penalty will be implemented by whom. So that is where we are with regard to Afghanistan.
When we look, you've mentioned the fact that we've presented them with irrefutable evidence, and that's been on the table. In the face of this irrefutable evidence that has been presented, do you rank the commitment of the Afghan Taliban perhaps higher during these talks than ever before? How do you look at it?
To be very honest, looking at the relationship that they have with TTA, a long-standing relationship that they have with TTA, there are a few things that the Pakistani side has to keep in mind, have to be very clear on it. Number one, the TTP is ideologically cut from the same cloth as the TTA, Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan. Number two, the TTA owes an oath of allegiance to the Taliban Supreme Leader Mullah Haibatullah. Number three, the TTP has aided and abetted and harbored them in the Pakistani tribal areas when US and NATO were present there. So, keeping all of that in mind, I don't see the TTA, TTA will at best, buy time through these negotiations, but for them to actually to expect that they will control or, curb the activities of TTA in the long run, or they will take any serious, meaningful action against them, that would be wishful thinking, I guess.
Mr. Masood, this is a land that has been ravaged by various factors over time. I mean, we're not talking about, a nation that is thriving economically. Do you think that those considerations are at this time important to the Afghan Taliban when they sit on the table with a country like Pakistan?
Look, traditionally, that has not been their forte. Economy has not been their forte. Public welfare, economy, welfare of the people. That is not what the Taliban in Afghanistan are known for. And with them harboring 21 terrorist outfits in their country, I don't see how they can, prioritize welfare of the people over that. And okay, they are no more an insurgent group. They are in power in Afghanistan as a government that at least has been de facto recognized by a number of the states around the world. They have a responsibility towards their people, but that doesn't seem to be their priority number one at the moment.
But in terms of, economic realities permeating, of course, the Indian nexus is there. But do you think that they are appreciating that if this war, escalates, and one hopes that it doesn't, the cost that they will pay, not just for, of course, the fabric of the economy and all, but just the cost of it to their people. Like you said, they're not known for it. But we've also demonstrated our power in the last month or so, like never before. Do you agree with that as far as the action that Pakistan has taken?
Well, we have, as a responsible state, as a state, that would want to employ all tactics short of use of force, in order to kind of make the Taliban see some sense. We have done that, and we hope, at least Pakistani policymakers hope that that would bear, some positive results for it. But, looking at the history of Afghanistan, it doesn't give me much hope. I mean, not in the very distant past. We saw that, for Osama bin Laden, who was wanted by the world powers, for acts of terrorism around the world, and in the US, I mean, they preferred to lose their government in Kabul rather than hand him over, as was being demanded by friendly states and from states around the world. So if they could not care, they could care less about their own government, and prefer, their ideological, commitments over that. I don't see them, acting anytime different. But having said that, the recent, closure of border has had, considerable effect on the bazaar, as we call it, or the business community in Afghanistan. And, we saw videos circulating on social media and on media, that the goods that they were supposed to transport, perishable goods that they were supposed to transport to Pakistan, those all kind of, were rotting in the
Of
trucks.
course.
So that has an impact on it. And I mean, they, at the back of their mind somewhere, that might be there. But, as I said, the priority always for them remains, their ideological commitment to their partners.
But what about the role of mediation? What about the mediation partners? Do you see them having a considerable sway as far as Turkey, Qatar is concerned? Of course, there are other countries involved also. How do you look at it?
I mean, mediation is just that. It's mediation. I mean, they can intervene. They can bring the, conflicting parties to the table. But end of the day, it's for the conflicting parties to, come to an agreement with regard to the differences that they have between each other. The mediator is not a mediating body is not a judicial body that can implement, kind of punishments or sanctions, on one of the parties that is not kind of being reasonable during the mediation. So, yeah, they can play a role. I mean, but the role is still limited. It's end of the day, it's for the two states to see reason and, come to some kind of an understanding with each other.
In terms of the border mechanisms, the role that these third parties can play, do you see that increasing? Because of course there are technologies available now in terms of manning this huge border, and of course the challenges that it poses for both Pakistan and Afghanistan, and for us of course to ensure that it remains secure. Do you see a larger role by these countries?
I mean, physical intervention, I don't see, any of the parties, whether it be Qatar or whether it be Turkey, physically intervening to make sure that, the border mechanism that is, kind of agreed upon between Pakistan and Afghanistan is honored by both sides in letter and spirit. So, with that possibility not there, it again remains for Pakistan and Afghanistan, to kind of come to some sort of an agreement. I mean, whatever border mechanism is put in place, it has to be in partnership between these two states.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Masood. Thank you for your very valuable input. Moving on, we're going to be moving to, of course, minerals and, of course, the US delegation at this time, and the secure, transparent mineral supply chains, and, of course, China's dominance. We have with us Usman Chohan. Thank you for joining us, Usman. How are you looking at this development, first of all? And of course, minerals have become, the mantra of minerals, I would say. First of all, let's sort of dissect it a bit. How do you look at it?
First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be with you. The most important word you have used is the mantra. The mantra that they are using in the great powers, US and China, is that they have to have supply chain security for rare earth and critical minerals. That is specifically the mantra. And the reason is that while US and China continue to have a little bit of tension in many, many fields, whether it is trade, whether it's education, shipping, etc., it's critical minerals where the US finds itself at a unique disadvantage so early in what is considered a transition in world world history as China becomes a larger economy, as China takes over the mantle as the number one country, quote unquote. The critical minerals supply chain was divested to China over a 3-decade period because of globalization, where it was found that China would do a very good job for the world economy by refining and also by extracting, because it has its own large territory which is rich in these minerals at scale. The at scale portion is now something that the United States and Europe consider to be a mistake, that we shouldn't have handed all of this to China, and so we have to recuperate it. So what the US is trying to do is do at scale refinery elsewhere. But it takes time to do that. It would take about a decade if you started now, and the US has started now, to be able to do the refining portion at scale. And so China has used this as leverage in its discussions with the United States, whether it's on tariffs, whether it's on other issues, that look, here is something that you shouldn't forget, that we have this trick up our sleeve, and if you don't come to the bargaining table in an honest manner, as an honest counterpart, you know what we might do with this. So the US is going around the world and trying to find other stakeholders, and Pakistan is one of them, in terms of diversifying the global rare earth and critical mineral supply chain. That is the background.
How much of it, in your opinion, you've explained somewhat in terms of an uncharted territory for countries like Pakistan, in a sense for countries like the US also? So are we looking at new norms? Are we looking at new, forms of action as we go forward with these, these exertions?
Certainly they're different norms, but I wouldn't call them new, because 500 years ago, the world economy looked very much like this in what was called mercantilism. So it was every man for himself, or every empire for itself, and people used to think of the world in very zero-sum terms. The colonial powers would start proxy wars and invasions and all sorts of other such actions back in the day to secure more territory, to enslave the natives, to extract the resources there, and so on. We're very much going back to those old norms. And what the last 80 years did was give us a reprieve from that in what was called the liberal rules-based order, but that had many problems of its own. And Pakistan is one of those countries that has seen the hypocrisy of the new, like 80-year-old system up front, up close and personal. So it wasn't that this new system was particularly good, but I do fear for the old system, because that winner takes all and every man for himself system was a nasty one. And yes, you're right that there are going to be changes. Those changes have been acknowledged now publicly. They have been a decade in the making. But for example, right now, the Canadian Prime Minister, in his speech at APEC, said that we're not going to go back to the old ways, and that system is dead. The old system is dead. Other leaders are echoing this. The only country that is truly advocating for the old system is actually China. China has said that no, there is room for cooperation, there is room for global integration and so on. But in terms of the countries that have been losing ground, they have certainly made statements recognizing that the old system is gone.
Usman, what about the real potential of it? How do you see it? The rare earth minerals, the potential for, of course, this kind of diplomacy that is at play at this time in the background, and of it translating into actual gains for a country like Pakistan. How would you rate it?
The gains for Pakistan are contingent on how much of the supply chain we manage to secure for ourselves. So if we are simply extracting things from the ground and selling them to other countries where they would be refined, where they would be inserted into high-end technological uses, then our gains would be quite minimal, but still large. It is estimated that Pakistan's mineral wealth is $6 trillion worth. Some push it up to $8 trillion. It can change depending on the prices of these minerals in the world market. So it's anywhere in that range. Now, we could sure do with that kind of money, but if that would only involve us digging and selling it out. But what if we could add refining processes, also the high-end factories where this stuff is used? I mean to say a fuller extent of the supply chain. Then the numbers become really appetizing. But at that level, then, you would face competition from many other countries that are trying to secure this in a mercantilist world. So that is a huge opportunity for Pakistan. Other countries also enjoy very large endowments of minerals, anywhere from Central Asia to Central Africa to Central America. I mean, they're quite well spread. I mean, this is a very bountiful earth. And we are only now discovering the importance of these things in because it's become a political issue. But the sorts of things that we are talking about in terms of rare earth and critical earth, these extend so far down the periodic table that most people have not heard these names in public conversations, and that's what we're competing for. The use cases for this are also things that are of modern demands, our contemporary world, ranging from data centers for AI to the new edge mobile phones to electric hybrid vehicles to new kinds of panels. The usages of the 21st century economy for these quote rare, because they're actually not rare, but certainly critical minerals is enormous. And therefore, how much of the supply chain we can secure will determine how much we can gain for it. And I advocate that we should be thinking of a larger percentage of the value chain rather than just extracting and selling off immediately.
Of it, how much of it and what share of it do you think it's going to become a part of global economy and also particularly Pakistan's economy? Like you said, of course, it depends on how we go forward. In terms
It does depend on how we go forward because, in terms of the share of the global economy, the value of other elements in the global economy will still remain significant. For example, food security will become a significant question for many countries as climate change induces droughts, induces things. So we shouldn't discount, for example, agriculture. And the terms of trade for agriculture countries might become stronger in the future because of the precarity of the environment. Similarly, there is a significant knowledge economy which involves intellectual property and other things which are intangibles, which will also remain significant. Whether it is patents, whether it is copyright, whether it is new innovations, whether it is methodologies and processes, those do command a significant premium and they will continue to do so, perhaps even more so. And that doesn't depend on physical things. But this critical mineral is called critical for a reason because, insofar as manufacturing matters, and we will want actual devices, we can't just live off of IP and basic commodities. That middle portion, which would be considered a primary sector, but a latter primary sector after agriculture, does matter. Otherwise, we won't be able to enjoy the 21st century's benefits. You won't see the manufacture. You simply remain at the blueprints. That is how important it is. So what I'm saying is that the global economy is a very diverse sphere, but critical minerals, insofar as manufacturing matters, it is very important. And certainly the politics around it will become more acute because to gain that technological edge is very important right now as the pace of innovation is accelerating in certain fields where these things matter.
But do you see, countries losing their hegemony with regard to this? When, of course, like other countries are coming into the foray, they're getting involved, so that monopoly will cease to be there as far as rare earth minerals are concerned.
Yes, that's an interesting point. So, as more and more countries become cognizant of the importance of the criticality of certain elements, rare earths, and so on, they will try to edge in. They will try to manufacture or extract or refine. But again, China will be the one that does it at scale. So, they will always command some presence in the global supply chain. What other countries can do is refine at a more inefficient level, do it with some efficiency losses, or specialize in certain minerals that they have more of an abundance of in endowment, or with applications to certain types of technologies. Finding niches of that sort is very likely, but it is unlikely that even a decade from now it would be cost effective for any major power to try to displace China entirely in the refining of these minerals, because it's not just that China extracts and then refines what it has. It also takes in minerals from around the world, such as from Latin America, from Africa, and so on. And those then get passed on for usage in the supply chain. So nobody is really going to be able to displace China. So it is very important. And I feel like sometimes we forget this in 2025, that we are blessed to have a very unique friendship, and in fact many people would say, both on Chinese side and our side, brotherhood brotherhood with China, we shouldn't take our special relationship with China for granted ever. Because as China proceeds further, it's not just the refining, but the application. China is pushing that boundary of application as well. That means that if it ever imposes a regime that is preferential with other countries, it will consider Pakistan a priority. So you do already enjoy the window. So even as you become more and more multilateral and you think about multipolarity, let's not forget the special consideration that China has for us and we have for them. This will become more important as we hit the mid 21st century.
Usman, as far as, I want to come to a general sort of outlook on minerals as in terms of economy. Do you see this having a multiplier effect, as far as investment is concerned? Because when a country like the US opens the door and edges in, there has to be a multiplier effect. Don't you agree?
I certainly agree. Pakistan's biggest limitation in the last 80 years has been the absence of investment capital. So we always knew that the potential was there, whether it is the natural endowments that Pakistan enjoys, that is a blessing from the Lord, or it is our human talent, our human capital, and that simply needed more investment. You do see extraordinary people in Pakistan doing amazing stuff, and at the same time, you see inequality in that, just like you see inequality in the economy. So the missing ingredient was large-scale investment capital. Mining is an area where, because there is global interest in trying to secure edges within the supply chain, there is readiness for investment, irrespective of what sorts of legal, political, and economic conditions are on the ground. There's far more openness to invest. Pakistan is also very open to the idea that international players come and set up those sorts of processes for extraction, for shipping, hopefully for refinement. So from all sides, we see an openness towards things. Now, the question is, where do the benefits of that go? We should always look for the dividends of this to always go towards local communities. We should look for investment for the public value, for the people, because this capital doesn't reproduce itself easily. So you use up your natural endowment in minerals, it ain't coming back. You just have to keep digging deeper, and it becomes more expensive, and then you're likely to run out at some point. So what you need is a more sustainable approach to your economy. This is the same with oil, and you see how the Gulf countries are diversifying away from oil. They're imagining what their country will be like 50 years from now. So we should also look at this as part of a portfolio of assets that Pakistan has. So we're using our minerals as part of the development of our overall economy, which includes human capital, which includes agriculture, which includes everything. And then it is worth doing. Otherwise, if we don't do it in a sustainable manner, then I believe it's better to just leave it in the ground so that some other generation comes and uses it more wisely.
We also had the Minister for Finance saying that Pakistan is working on major legal and regulatory reforms to support responsible investment and mutual benefit. Do you think, we've been talking about how essential these are to get the momentum of economy going. Once they're in place, would you have an idea of what the pace of development, it could impact?
Yes, because historically, the greatest impediment to the development of our mining sector has been a lack of policy clarity on the provincial and federal level vis-a-vis the resources. So if you can bring policy coherence, you make it a lot easier for the investors to come in and to do their work more efficiently in a stable and secure manner. It doesn't mean that if you didn't do these reforms, that investment wouldn't come. It's just that important. And as I said, there's an openness to get things running in Pakistan no matter what. But you can certainly make it easier for everybody if you have policy coherence, and you'd be making up for the deficits that you had in the past by not doing this. Overall, policy coherence is very, very important for any country, because investors do need that sense of a future cash flow, a sense of a future path to cash flows. That always becomes easier when there's policy coherence, that these are the people I have to deal with, this is what I need to get done, these will be my returns, and these will be my expenses. So the statement that was made by the minister basically signals that we are more cognizant of that, and we're going to make it easier for investors, because this is just that important to us and to the world. So that's what we're trying to signal.
When, I know that you have little time, but Usman, in terms of positioning ourselves as a balancing act, you spoke about China and of course the importance that Pakistan has, the relationship that we have with China. But as balancing goes, in your opinion, with the background of investment, we are also looking at, developing ties that we have old ties with. We have relationships with the US, we have the relationships with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, also, of course, China. So in terms of balancing, one has to agree that Pakistan at this time is doing a stellar job.
Yes, and I believe that you have covered this very well on your show over the last few months in recognizing the excellence of diplomacy in Pakistan, which is historic, although the challenges were greater in the past, but Pakistan has always sought that balancing act, and the conditions that have been changed on the ground reality, where Pakistan has demonstrated its will to fight and protect itself, but also that it is a well-intentioned actor that's not looking for a fight, but will stand up for it. This signals something to the rest of the world that, okay, we shouldn't look at them or pigeonhole them into this or that box. These are real people with a real program for their destiny. And that is what is being reflected. Pakistan is sincere in its friendship with China, with the Middle East, with Turkey, with America, all the actors. It has actually hit a sweet spot that would be the envy of every other country, because other countries continue to be pigeonholed into this or that camp, even though everybody would benefit from a more balanced global multipolar system. We've actually pulled off, but it required some demonstration of will and some demonstration of force to protect ourselves. So that success is now being manifested, and I think the legacy of this will continue, whether or not we face more conflicts.
Right. Thank you so much, Usman. Thank you for your very valuable input. On that note, of course, Pakistan has a transformational opportunity in minerals. And at this time, we see a government strongly exploring it. And we also see it backed by legal and regulatory reforms in the making, with a transforming economy in front of us. Let's hope that we get there. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.